Hello, everybody, and welcome to this Daily Maverick webinar. My name is Victoria O'Regan, and I am a journalist at Daily Maverick, and I will also be your host for this webinar discussion today. It's wonderful to have so many of you with us for what I'm sure is going to be an incredibly interesting, perhaps spicy discussion around President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address last Thursday. In many ways, Ramaphosa's address was very typical of an election year SONA. It was long, it was very densely packed, and it was also very administratively ambitious. It was also filled with support for the government of national unity and its gains. But as many South Africans will know, the speech really is the starting point. The real test sort of lies in its implementation and in accountability. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Karabo Khakhau, who is the DA's national spokesperson and MP on higher education. She's unfortunately running a couple of minutes late, so she will join us in a few minutes. But I have here already Fasiha Hassan, who is a very prominent youth leader and ANC MP. She's a member of several portfolio committees in Parliament, and particularly the Energy Portfolio Committee and Minerals and Petroleum Resources Committee. I'm also joined by Makasule Gana from Rise Mzansi. He is the chief organizer for the party, and he's an MP also on various portfolio committees in Parliament. He's also been a very strong voice against South Africa's online gambling crisis. So, to those of you who are joining us, please feel free to pop your questions, comments, observations, etc. in the chat, and we will get to them either as we go along with our discussion or at the end of the conversation. But without further ado, I would like to begin with some opening reflections from each of you on the state of the nation. So, Sia, can we start with you? What was your key takeaway from the SONA?
I think quite a bit. I actually thought it was a very good state of the nation. I think there's some acknowledging that it may have been long, but it really did touch on all the different issues that we're really facing in the country. I think the big takeaway, which I know we're going to obviously have in this discussion, was around water, around some of the economic reforms. But for me, on a lighter level, I really appreciated the time that he took at the beginning of SONA to acknowledge the 1956 Women's March and the fact that in 1976, young people also took to the streets. And perhaps that was very important to me because I am young and because I am a woman. And I thought it was just so apt that we should take that moment to acknowledge it. That doesn't take away from the crises in the country, but I think it is an important grounding point because ultimately that's what's brought us here. But for me, water, economic reforms, and of course, for me in the Energy Committee, and we'll hopefully talk about it around the transmission stuff and around how we're turning around the energy sector for more long-term sustainability.
We will get back to those takeaways in a second, specifically the water and energy, as you say. But Makasule, what is your key takeaway from the SONA? Maybe it's just me.
Thanks very much. So, good afternoon to you, Victoria, and good afternoon to Fasiha. So, the big takeaway for me, looking at the SONA, and if I were to kind of sum it in terms of the key themes, the bulk of the speech focused on the safety and also the economy, because the two are very much linked. So I was not surprised. So it was not a lot of surprising pronouncements, because SONA by its nature is not supposed to be a lot of surprises, because you are living in South Africa every day. You just have to look in terms of what South Africans are concerned about. And if you're in parliament like myself, you know, how you gauge the state of the nation, it's also the questions that are being asked to ministers. If you were to come to parliament and ask which minister receives the most question, is the Minister of Police. That tells you something around how South Africans are feeling unsafe, feeling like, like the state's capacity to protect its citizens as the first responsibility maybe is not being done correctly. The economy, people are trying their best to keep up with the rising cost of living. Unfortunately, others resort to gambling in an effort to try to do that. But there was also a lot insofar as the role of local government, because when you talk about the water issues, it speaks to the ability of local government to deliver on its mandate. And there's an interesting aspect that the president speaks about in terms of some assumptions that we made in giving municipalities that can't deliver the services, but we've given them the responsibility. So those are the key, the kind of key takeaways for me to say, no, the speech did hit the right notes. In terms of the president speaks about the issues that concern South Africa, yes. But obviously, for us is to then move to the next stage, which is where will the money be sent to? Because that's what tells which of the priorities the president has outlined will be funded and which ones will be delayed a bit.
Yes, absolutely. So you've just mentioned water. That was a huge sort of focus of the president's speech. So one of the things that we saw was the president announcing this new water crisis committee, right? And it's a national water crisis committee that he will chair, and it's basically consolidating the work of the previous task forces. And what I was thinking while the president was announcing this was that as taking over the chair, the president is kind of further expanding his presidency, which already includes like intelligence and the National Security Council, National Energy Crisis Committee, and also the Structural Reform Unit, Operation Vulindlela. So how will Parliament kind of hold the president accountable when there is no parliamentary oversight committee that exists for his office with regards to that?
Thanks, Victoria. Let's deal with it on two levels. Let's deal with the water part and then the actual idea of a super presidency. I actually think it's a good thing that a state president should say, not only publicly to the country, but to the international community, that water is such a big crisis in this country that he's dedicating all of this time, energy, effort, and budget to solving it. And I think it's very important because South Africans, even now as I speak to you, I'm also a Joburg resident without water. And it's something in which I think there's a feeling in the country that there is not enough energy and efforts being put in. So I think that's actually a very important point, that the president should take it back and say, actually, this is so important, I'm going to focus fully on it, right? And as the president indicated, this is about chronic underfunding. This is about a lack of maintenance and a lack of putting in the kind of infrastructure, which is important to note because it's not necessarily about not having water. This means that the problem is more solvable in terms of those issues. And let's also look at how we dealt with load shedding and the energy crisis. When they created the national, what we call NECOM, the National Electricity Crisis Committee, this was actually a bringing together of the very best minds, both from the public and the private sector and everyone else in between. And this is how we were actually able to not just solve load shedding for the short term, but look at long-term energy sustainability and security. And if we can do that on water, I think it could really be a big game changer. But let me answer your next question, which is about dealing with this idea of a super presidency. I think we hear this kind of criticism often. And in reality, we are dealing with 9 lost years of a lack of state capacity and state development. And one of the ways that you need to do this, if you look at some of the projects like Operation Vulindlela, and some of the other interventions, it was actually modeled off Tony Blair's service delivery war room kind of idea. And we've actually seen some really incredible green shoots that have come from it. So there is one way to look at it, that there's a lot being centralized. But in terms of accountability, the Rules Committee in Parliament has actually recently approved the establishment of the new Portfolio Committee that will play oversight over the president. So we are actually going to have a lot more sustainability in terms of that accountability in questions, etc. Of course, the president does come to Parliament. He answers to Q&A. There's a number of NA and NCOP mechanisms. There's the presidency budget vote, and of course the actual committee oversight in those various line departments. But the big takeaway is that in fact we are going to be, and already this process has started, to establish a portfolio committee specifically for the presidency. So it's not a bad thing that the president's saying, I'm taking over on this thing. I think it's good. It's about coordination. It's about centralization. because it is unfortunately clear that we cannot solve this alone on a local government and a provincial level as well.
Makasule, I think I recall that you are on the Rules and Ethics Committee in Parliament, or at least an alternative member. How are you planning on, what is going to be your kind of strategy in this committee to hold the president accountable for his role in this National Water Crisis Committee?
Yeah, thanks. So it's not just the Water Crisis Committee. Like when now you have got the Portfolio Committee on the presidency, the start point, and we are just finalizing today the membership of the committee, because we needed to, as also the smaller parties to then consult, make sure that the right members are then appointed. You then move as the first. I will say as the first business of the committee is to then look at the commitments made at the State of the Nation, but also look at the task teams and the committees that the president has established since he came into office in 2018, and how have they fared? Where are they insofar as the recommendations are concerned? So over and above, for instance, the 4 times that the president will come to Parliament to answer questions, now you will spend a day with the committee answering in terms of the work of the presidency. And this will become one of the questions that we need to understand insofar as how this crisis committee is working. But it's good. It's good that now it's the water issue, because water is life, is being elevated to the top priority, that even when cabinet meets, that it should not conclude. There should not be a cabinet meeting that concludes and there hasn't been a report, but also to say which municipalities are we intervening? Because ordinarily, you see, when the president says the government has laid criminal charges against 56 municipalities, then you should be able to say, but things must not get to that level. And there needs to be an earlier intervention to correct the wrongs, because laying a criminal charge against the municipality does not bring water to the resident. The resident of Emfuleni still does not have water. What South Africans want is not just to tell us that so many managers have been fired, so many managers are in jail. Yes, that must happen. But what South Africans want is to turn their tap and there's water coming out. Is to be able to know that the traffic lights are being attended to. So we are dealing, even when you look at the Gauteng issue, we are not dealing with a natural disaster. And sometimes when we talk about these things, we like thinking like we are dealing with a natural disaster. No, some of it is man-made. We know that there has to be money for maintenance and repairs. But for a long time, that has been neglected. But our position as Rise Mzansi is as follows, Victoria. We can cry about what was not done yesterday. The water pipe is not fixed today. Let's get it fixed. Let's ensure that there's water that goes to the people, households, as it happens in other parts, whilst simultaneously we hold those responsible to account. So it's not to wait. And I know, like, of interest for me that the president was talking about, because this is the other thing that happens at the local government, is that you find contracts are being awarded, but then the losing parties then take the matter through a lengthy process of the judiciary. Like taking it to courts and so forth. That process does not ensure that services are being delivered, but it delays the delivery of services. And that the president says, no, we must find a way, a tribunal to quickly deal with these matters. I believe that it will come in handy, especially for local government, but on critical issues like water.
Fasiha, before we move on to crime and organized crime in the country and the comments that the President made there with regards to the deployment of the SANDF, I would briefly like to just talk about his remarks regarding South Africa's institutions, which he says remain robust and independent. We recently saw the arrest of the High Court Judge Portia Falane on allegations of corruption and also money laundering towards the end of last year, which really shocked the country. You're a representative on the Judicial Services Commission. From what you've seen on the JSC, are you satisfied that institutions like the judiciary remain as independent as Ramaphosa claimed?
Thanks, Victoria. I am having some internet challenges all of a sudden. So if I drop out, just let me know and then I'll repeat. But yes, you know, our institutions have actually been a major site of struggle, especially during the state capture years. And unfortunately, the judiciary took quite a knock in terms of very nefarious actors in the country who really wanted to harm the judiciary. And I'm very lucky to sit on what we call the Judicial Service Commission, the JSC. So for those who are listening in who don't know what that is, it's effectively a body that interviews and appoints judges, but it also deals with the conduct of judges, etc., etc. So yes, I do think, by the way, that the judiciary is still genuinely independent. You see it in all the judgments that come out that don't flatter the executives, that I think make governmental departments run and make them very upset. But there is a meaningful check on power in that. I think there's another conversation about sometimes overstepping and separation of powers, but that's another whole conversation. But robust institutions doesn't necessarily mean immune. And this is also important. So we can be independent, but it can be eroded by chronic underfunding, vacant posts, weak court administration, you know, delays, and even public attacks that aim to sort of delegitimize the courts. Many people don't realize how harmful this is in saying that this judge, that one, and this doesn't take away from the fact that there are obviously problems in the system, but I think there is some looking into that we need to really consider. So yes, on the JSC side, we're always looking to appoint or choose people that strengthen the competence, the ethics, the transformation of the judiciary. That's really important. But the reality is that there may be institutional independence, but we also have to be honest about that institutional strain. And one of the things the president actually announced in SONA was around the commercial high courts that are going to be established. Now, this is really critical, not only for the administration of justice, because we've got different special courts for GBV, etc., etc. This is also important for economic reform. It means we can really turn things around much faster. But the long story short is that we're working again to recapacitate institutions, but it's a long process and it's not going to happen overnight.
Karabo, I see you've joined us. Thank you so much for your time. I missed in the beginning asking you what your key takeaway was from SONA. I asked Fasiha and Makasule, so would you mind just sharing your reflections on the state of the nation?
Thank you so much, Victoria, and hello to everybody, and thank you for gracing me the patience of my delay. So look, the key takeaway we have from the president's address is that, I mean, the Democratic Alliance's participation in the GNU is one that is very fruitful and one that's beneficial to the Republic. You would have heard that a whole lot of good work that is being done in government highlights the good contribution of DA ministers, from basic education, the investment in early childhood development to bridge the gap between our numeracy and literacy levels, ensuring that young kids get to grade 4 being able to do 1+1 with meaning and read sentences with meaning, construct effective correspondence when communicating, which is a step in the right direction in building the basics around education. That's one. Two, you would have heard we're cracking into Asian markets for exports, which is contributing very healthily towards the growth of our economy. Our citrus and grapes in the Department of Agriculture here, led by Steenhuisen, are able to trickle down well for our economy. Also, as far as infrastructure development is concerned, through the property company led by the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure through McPherson there, also indicates a good contribution of. We would have heard Home Affairs. I mean, I don't know if 3 years ago the Republic would have imagined that you can knock at a bank's door and ask for an ID. I assume if anybody said that to you, people would be like, "You're crazy, you're really mad." But with the stellar leadership of Leon Schreiber there, we're able to imagine such, and are also able to reimagine in the future being able to digitize that. Of course, we still have to do a whole lot as far as border control is concerned, but also the fact that the president spoke healthily towards the vision there of digitization and and spending more money there to close down our borders and be able to protect our sovereignty shows that we are stepping in the right direction. I could go on with a whole list of things that are a highlight. What is of concern, however, Victoria, is the president yet again spoke about corruption, how municipalities are not performing optimally. What the president, however, forgot to mention is the fact that majority of these municipalities that he's referring to are ANC-run municipalities, led by cadres of his own movement. Perhaps if the president really was clear about wanting to detox the system of corruption, he would outlaw cadre deployment, number one. Number two, he would overhaul the entire deployment of mayors and municipal managers across ANC municipalities. I mean, these are ANC cadres. He's responsible for the ANC. And so if he wanted to show the country that indeed he is committed to detoxing the system, that's where he would start. And then finally, Victoria, we as far as crime and organized gangsterism is concerned, the deployment of the National Defence Force is very welcome because the Western Cape government had made calls for that. But we maintain that this is just a temporary solution, Victoria. The long-term solution that we need is the devolution of policing powers. Crime, gangsterism need an all-hands-on-deck approach. That means give local municipalities and provincial governments a localized devolution of policing powers so that we're all able to play our part in saving our communities.
Thank you, Karabo. Makasule, I wanted to pick up on the last point that Karabo made with regard to SANDF deployment. What is your opinion on the deployment of the army? Is this the right strategy to kind of deal with gang violence and illegal mining in the Western Cape and Gauteng?
Thanks. So we accept it as a temporary measure because it cannot be a permanent solution to have the army dealing with this. But given some of the challenges happening within the police, I think the army must assist insofar as the visibility is concerned, because that's also important, and that's where that ought to be. But the bulk of the work needs to be done by the South African Police Service, because it's not just the visibility, it's the ability to investigate the cases, including current and previous cases, make sure that they are sent to the NPAs for prosecution and eventually to the magistrate and the court system. So the army will help to offer the stabilization, but it cannot be thought of as a permanent solution. So we'll await the letter that the president has to send to the National Assembly, because in that letter it should be able to indicate the time frame, how many personnel is going to be deployed, how much it will cost. But for me, it's more the capacitation of the South African police detective, because most of the gangs that are committing these crimes, they are not like first-time offenders. It's people that have been offending for a very long time, but they've just not been apprehended and taken through the court system. And in cases where some of them are taken through the court system, their cases collapse. And what we are seeing, so you need to link these two around the whistleblower and witness protection, because the modus operandi, especially amongst the gangs, the people, the perpetrators within the drug and so forth, is that anyone who is a witness and wants to testify against them end up being killed. So the cases collapses as a result of witnesses being killed. We even have instances, and you might have reported on this, that people are killed in front of the courts. So so people coming out of the court now they get killed so that the cases collapse. So it's not just the work of the South African Police Service and the temporary solution of the army, but you also need the NPA to come on board so that these cases can be prosecuted as quickly as possible. So because if only you have the army temporary. It's not the first time that the army is deployed, especially to the Western Cape. It will not be the first time. So sometimes what these gangsters do, they say, all right, the president says the army will be deployed for 6 months. Then they go on recess of their criminality for 6 months. As soon as the army is withdrawn, then they go back to their ways. But what should happen now, now that the army is going to assist the police, now it frees up the resources of the police to focus on the investigation of the cases to ensure that these cases are enrolled and the perpetrators are sentenced and removed from society. It will not be a good sight when you have a gun battle between the army and the gangs. It's not something that we want to see. We want to see the army that then maintains order, and at all times, the operation, from our view as Rise Mzansi, the operation needs to be led by the South African Police Service and not the army leading the efforts. It must be commanded by the South African Police Service as the organization responsible for protecting South Africans in the first instance. Thanks very much.
Yeah, do you want to maybe offer your comment on the deployment of the SANDF, and also maybe briefly respond to some of the things that Karabo said? I see that there is a comment from an audience member, Mwande G, saying that the DA is now the audience in an ANC orchestra. I don't know if the DA is government or opposition. We didn't vote for this nonsense. Joburg is without water. Do we now need a DA minister there?
All right, Victoria, let me tackle something quickly on the SANDF. Look, I think there is some positive intervention. The reality is that the police are inundated in that regard, and we really do need to provide more support. And where we actually agree with the Honorable Gana is actually that we do need to recapacitate the police. But in the meanwhile, and I think this is also coming as a direct cry from our people, and this is one of the reasons why President Ramaphosa, who of course is an ANC president, has really responded to that call by saying we will reinforce. This is very important, to reinforce the police in terms of the deployment of the SANDF. But we agree this is not a long-term solution. And the president even spoke to that. He said that while we are dealing with all of the stuff in terms of crime, safety and security, and he acknowledged that organized crime is such a threat to our democracy. He said, in addition to all of these interventions, including the 20,000 extra police officers who were announced last year, we have an additional 5,000 now that are coming through. In addition, with more boots on the ground, we also need these economic reforms, because if we don't deal with the root cause of what ultimately creates these problems, we're always going to be dealing with the symptom thereof. And there are a number of major interventions that have come across. We've really seen some of the interventions, and I mentioned this earlier in terms of the economic grassroots, green shoots rather, that we've seen through. We've seen a strengthening of the rand. We're seeing inflation at its all-time lowest. We're really trying to tackle the issues that deal with the high cost of living in the country. And you're seeing all these different things in addition to the SRD grant, and trying to really deal with a number of different poverty markers, because unfortunately, many people unfortunately have to turn to crime to look after their families. And that's why we need a more holistic approach, which the president spoke to. I know you asked me something else. I just wanted to answer that first. If you could just repeat that question, I'd appreciate that.
I think I've still got a lot to get through, so I think I'm going to just move on quickly back to Karabo. And just go to the new state property company that was announced, which is tasked with transforming 88,000 buildings and 5 million hectares of land into professionally managed engines of growth and development. It seems that this was first punted by DA Minister Dean McPherson. Karabo, how will this work in practice? Like, does the state even know all of the properties that it owns? Could you shed some light on some of this?
Yeah, so you're correct. It was first punted by DA Minister Dean McPherson, because at the heart of what we have identified to be a problem as far as infrastructure management in our country is that there isn't a centralization of a database that identifies where exactly is which property, in what condition is it, what the maintenance plan is for it, and for what purpose is it being used, if it is being used at all. So what the state company then does is a reimagination of what the actual primary role of the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure is supposed to be. Not only being able to say this is the number of properties I have that are currently not in use, let's say in Mangaung, and then in conversation with the Department of Higher Education, we say, okay, of these properties, this is how many of them we can give actually to student accommodation. The same conversation happens with social development to say this is how many of them we would need for shelters, for GBV, for homes, the whole shebang. So what the property company also affords us the ability to do is to have a focused approach in how we're turning South Africa into a construction site, because we know that infrastructure development and most importantly are the backbone of a healthy conducive environment for economic growth and investment thereof. So that is exactly what we are trying to do. We're obviously going to be looking at new projects that are going to add to the batch of properties that exist. But at the main, there is no need to have a new project and open it up for manipulation of tender systems, which has become the bread and butter politics of a lot of cadres, when we have properties that just need to be revamped, flipped, and repurposed for the country's needs. I want to respond to the question that was put by Mawande GI, because I think it's a very important question. When the Democratic Alliance entered into the GNU, Victoria, we were never blind to the fact that we had been in opposition before, and that quite a lot of how the ANC does government is a problem, not only for us, but for the country in itself. They have cried. There have been questions around corruption, around state capture, about the efficient use of public money, about service delivery altogether. And so it would be mad of us to stay in the same room as the ANC. And in cases where we're not happy in how they're conducting state affairs, keep quiet just for the sake of being for maintaining collegiality in the relationship. It's like being in an abusive relationship with your partner and never saying anything because you're scared you're going to hurt their feelings. In fact, that worsens the problem. What is the cornerstone of a healthy relationship that is beneficial for everybody who depends on it, being the Republic of South Africa, is being able to have healthy and honest contestations of ideas and reflections of what the modus operandi of the country is. And that is what we are doing. As far as water and sanitation is concerned, look, we maintain that Johannesburg, alongside all other parts of the country that have massive water crisis, could have been easily averted. Not because easily so because South Africa doesn't have a water supply problem. We're not drought stricken. There's water in our reservoirs. The problem is that municipalities who've been responsible for paying water boards have charged the money. They have not paid water boards. The relationship between municipalities and water boards have been completely unhealthy, with no consequence whatsoever, leaving residents stranded and without water, living with dry taps. And so again, I maintain, Victoria, that if we are going to change the problem, if we're going to fix the problem, we need to change the reasons why we have a problem. It's a local government year, local government election year. Residents have an opportunity to boot out the ANC and vote in people that they have absolutely 100% faith that they'll be able to give them water. And the only political organization in this country that has a proven track record of being able to do so successfully is the Democratic Alliance. Not only because we like ourselves and would think positively of ourselves, but because independent assessors of governance have indicated that if there's anybody that knows how to spend money well, it is the Democratic Alliance, and that's where we are.
Thank you, Karabo. Fasiha, briefly on the topic of land reform, the president didn't mention anything about the Expropriation Act in his SONA, but he did instead sort of focus on the District 6 restitution project. Does the ANC support this kind of focus on restitution rather than expropriation? And has the party's stance on expropriation without compensation kind of changed?
Well, let's start with the last first. The stance has not changed. And I think it's also important to say that restitution is actually not a soft option. It's a constitutionally mandated form of redress. And I think District 6 in particular is an incredibly symbolic wound that the democratic state still needs to assist in healing. And it's a fascinating thing, some of the things that are being said by our DA spokesperson, because the District 6 management of that particular project has been so poorly managed by the City of Cape Town that the residents of District 6 are still feeling like no meaningful change has come about and has come across. But ultimately, restitution is not a substitute for this broader land reform that is required. And there must be expropriation where necessary. There must be that restitution, redistribution. But of course, we need to ensure that there is tenure security and productive use of the land. So on expropriation, the principle that the ANC has advanced consistently, whether it was yesterday, today, or tomorrow, is that land reform must be constitutional, it must be lawful, but it must also be in the public interest. And compensation must be just and equitable, which in some cases can be null, can be zero, but that's not actually a change, that's a constitutional framework. So no, the ANC hasn't abandoned this question. I think the real issue now is about implementation, the capacity, the planning, and ensuring that land reform supports livelihoods and food securities, moving just beyond those elements of announcements. And also important to mention, Victoria, you can't talk to every single issue in a SONA. If we had not spoken about this, it may have been another thing. And I think there was a lot of focus that the president put across in terms of how we manage other forms of land use, etc.
Thanks, Fasiha. Makasule, can I move to you briefly and to unemployment? And I see Pete asks in the comment section, I take a more modest take. Most of our social ills emerge from education and employment crises. Why do we make such incremental change to DTIC and DPE instead of large-scale reforms? So Makasule, Ramaphosa has announced that the government would provide more than 2.5 billion rand to support over 108,000 SMEs. Is this scale of intervention anywhere near what is required to tackle unemployment, and specifically youth unemployment in the country, which really remains at crisis levels?
Thanks. So, I mean, one will not say it's enough. It's a start. You know, like one of the things that I've raised in Parliament, it's that even when we've got this, we say we are assisting small businesses. The assistance that we give are like small change that end up just they don't go anywhere. And I've argued that if you want to support entrepreneurs, real entrepreneurs, and people that are taking a risk, you need to beg them seriously. Not give someone 5,000 rand and you then tick a box to say you have assisted a small business. Because if you then say on average what we are talking about, on average we are talking about 15,000 rand or less than that. That's what we are dealing with on average. So it's not the real thing. If you want to create jobs, because if you want to assist people to start businesses that create jobs, then you must offer. I rather have the government assist 200 real businesses that then employ maybe 50,000 people to be skilled, but also to work there, because some of this problem, and I've served in the economic development when I was in Gauteng, is that you've got these small agencies that then says, no, we are going to give these young entrepreneurs 5,000 rand. Or if you are in the NYDA, they say you give someone 10,000 rand. What will they do? They can't even fly to and from Johannesburg and Cape Town. If there's just to come and fly between Johannesburg and Cape Town, that 5,000 is finished. So if we want to really beg young entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in South Africa, let's put our money where our mouth is. 2.5 billion sounds good in a state of the nation, but in reality, it's 12,000 rand. So you say, all right, with 12,000 rand, you are not really creating jobs, because what you are actually doing, you are giving an income to 180,000 people. So if you give someone 10,000 rand and you say go and create a job, what job will be created with 10,000 rand? If we are being honest with ourselves. So you need to assess this to say, no, man, this approach is not right. And I've raised as a final point, there's always this misguided view, especially when it comes to small businesses, that you'll find that the 180,000 that are being targeted are the unemployed that don't have any income. Now you are giving an unemployed person who does not have an income, you are giving them 10,000 rand. The first thing that they think about, what do they think about? Instead of saying, who are the people in industries that we can say, all right, now, Ghana, here you are. You have learned something in politics. Maybe go and start, we'll support you to start a business out of this and employ 5, 10 other people. But taking the money and giving it to someone who's unemployed, does not have a lot of work experience, so you are just sinking the money rather than creating the necessary changes that are needed. So we need to assess it, but 15,000 rand is just not enough. It's 15,000 rand. That's what it is.
If I may, Victoria, quickly here, I think there's some point in what Dona Gana is speaking of here. But the bottom line is, yes, we need more money invested into small businesses for them to succeed, because they do need those injections from the state. And it's a beautiful initiative that we have a state that is able to offer support to small businesses. But small businesses depend on local economies and local infrastructure that works in order for them to survive. For example, you have a lot of businesses, small businesses, that have to close down because there's no water in their municipalities. Not only in the city of Johannesburg, but where I come from, in Valkomama-Chabeng, water is sporadic depending on which day whoever's responsible for water feels like there's water. That is a very serious problem, because for a small business, they do not have the reserves in money to be able to pay for jojos or to have boreholes. That is a massive problem. So local government plays an important role in making and breaking our economies. Two, when there are load reductions within municipalities because municipalities owe Eskom money, that hampers a small business's ability to operate efficiently. When a small business owner has 1 or 2 cars as part of their introduction fleet, and the fleet that they use has to travel on potholes all day, every day, the small change that they have, they could have invested in their business, that they now have to use on changing tires, or something as simple as changing a tire, takes away from that business's ability to actually succeed. And again, crime, which is why, in addition to the temporary solution of the NCD, of the National Defence Force, we need a localized approach to dealing with crime. If we have a decentralization of policing powers, then municipalities like the city of Cape Town, for example, we have LEAP officers that have been operating within the Western Cape, but those LEAP officers can't really do much if they do not have the policing authority that we need them to have. And so these are the things that when we honestly have a conversation about what more needs to be done for businesses, we need to be honest about how national government can give you money, but if your local government is failing you, then that money automatically goes down the drain.
Thanks, Karabo. So let's actually turn to local government, because it is a local government election year, and there is a question from Ruth Katz that I see has come through, saying she would like to ask Fasiha about what criteria the ANC uses for electioning and appointing premiers and provincial officials. Fasiha, what criteria does the party use?
I think just very quickly, what we're going to in 2026 is a local government election. So we're not going to be voting on a provincial level. That was what happened in 2024. So now the discussion needs to be around councillors, on mayors, on MMCs, etc., etc. But let me get into the meat of this situation, because it is something that comes up a lot. And I think there is, unfortunately, a misunderstanding of how things work in the ANC. The ANC actually uses a very structured approach. Even for me to become a member of parliament, we went through a number of different interventions. I had to go through a number of different interviews. You have to submit. There's all sorts of things that you need to actually do for you to actually be a public representative of the ANC. But let's deal with some of the specifics. The first is competence and capacity. So when we talk about cadre deployment, the base level of that is competence and capacity. And if anyone is interested, they're welcome to also Google and read the actual document, which is available on our website. So that talks to leadership experience. It talks to understanding governance, about the ability to manage programs and budgets and the machinery of the state. But the second, and this is really important, is around integrity and ethical leadership. And that is actually one of the reasons why we've even introduced what we call the step aside notion. So if there's any question on a person's leadership, they have to in fact step aside, not only from their party role, but from their governance role as well. And our movement has had to learn very painfully at times that you can't build a developmental state with leaders who have credibility problems. The third deals with representativity and transformation. You have to include that in terms of gender and youth as well, because leadership must reflect society. If you have a government that doesn't reflect the majority of the society, it means that transformation is not real, it's decorative. And there's been a huge attack, unfortunately, on BEE, but the reality is we're only 32 years into democracy, and we still have an economy that is structurally in the hands of the minority, and we have some of the highest inequality rates. And that's one of the reasons why transformation will always be critical in this country, and it is not a nice to have, it is a fundamental. But we also consider political judgment and stability. For example, a premier has to be able to hold an executive together, work with various municipalities, and coordinate across departments. But I want to deal with the elephant in the room, and that is about this upcoming local government election. How are we going to select our councillors? How are we going to select our mayors? We're now going through a very rigorous process. Apart from the internal processes I've mentioned around interviews, around qualifications, etc., we've also introduced another level of community meetings in which local communities can have a say in who the ANC candidate is for their ward committees, or rather their ward councillors. And this is really to create buy-in, but it's also around trying to reactivate active citizenry. So that's the one thing. But former President Kgalema Motlanthe, he chairs our internal election system, and they've looked at some really innovative ideas to do that. So even our mayoral candidates are not just going to be decided on a regional level. We've got a lot of national intervention. They're going to be interviewed by the president, the deputy president, the secretary general, our top upper echelons of our leadership. You're actually going to start seeing in our local government election. So there's no system that's perfect. But it is important to note that there is a framework. We're sticking to that framework, and we've done quite a lot of work to try to remove that cancer that unfortunately has really harped on in the party for some time. But there are a number of interventions, and I'd also be happy to maybe discuss with Ruth going forward, because we always want to hear ideas from people. We don't want to exclude people, but we also want to ensure that we get the very best of those coming together. And if Victoria, you'll allow me, I want to talk a little bit quickly to the economic stuff, because I think it's really, really critical. We are in a better position this year than we were a year ago. And I think the president really outlined some important points that we need to deal with. And I think it's quite necessary, if you'll allow me. I mentioned some of the ratings, the ratings agencies. I spoke about the inflation going down, but we're really starting to see even the cost of electricity and so those interventions on renewable energy bringing it down. And this ultimately is towards contributing to a lower cost of living, because we hear you, we understand that South Africans are really struggling. The president said it, life is difficult. And that's one of the major things that we want to focus on, not only in this SONA, but going forward into 2029 as well.
Thanks, Fasiha. Karabo, I saw your face during Fasiha's comments. I would just like to get your response or input on some of what she said.
Yeah, Victoria, Fasiha sounds beautiful, very glossy, but Fasiha sounds like an ANC representative in 1994, when the country still had hope of some sort of sobriety within the ranks of the ANC. There is no way in hell Fasiha can say with her chest that the premiers that this country has, in the form of Queen Matai in the Free State, in the form of Mabuyane, in the form of, I could give you a whole list, including Panyaza Lusufi himself, who has the bravery to tell the Republic that he can go and take a shower at a hotel when his residents do not have water. I could give you a full encyclopedia book worth of content on what is wrong with premiers within the ANC. She also cannot have the guts to tell the Republic that the councillors that we have, who are unable to read for meaning themselves, unable to construct the sentences, unable to read budgets, and who have rendered themselves useless for the Republic, who have been appointed by the ANC through the same branch and community level engagements that she's been talking about, that the ANC has done all along, that they are merit-based appointments, that they look at competence, that they look at everything that is necessary. There's no such thing. Because if there was such a thing, Victoria, we would have clean audits left, right, and center across municipalities. We would have actual service delivery on the ground. People would have water, potholes would have been filled, street lights would be working, sewage wouldn't be, we wouldn't be walking in sewage spillage valleys across our communities. There's a whole lot that is wrong. And at the heart of what is wrong in our municipalities is gaslighting the Republic into oblivion, where we know for a fact that the public reps that the ANC have put forth across municipalities and across all governments are not the best that they offer. Perhaps Fasiha herself is sitting here having a conversation with us. She knows very well that in her organization, she can't even dream to even fight for proper deployment given her capacity, because what matters more is Chawism and more than competence in her own organization. That's just a lie. She's lying to us.
I think, Victoria, it's important to respond because there have been quite a number of salacious comments made. And if you'll allow me, Victoria, let me deal with them quite directly. It's a fascinating thing that the DA should come forward and say that they are the kings and queens of all governance in the country. Their very own George Mayor, who caused the crisis and allowed the negligent building collapse that killed many, many people, was actually redeployed to the Western Cape legislature to protect him from accountability. And I can name a number of different examples all over the country of running away from accountability, but more importantly, running away from the poorest of the poor. If you are here in the Western Cape, which is meant to be the sort of flagship of incredible leadership, if you go into the townships here, there is less service delivery in townships here than there are in townships in ANC-led areas. And that is fundamentally because we are not about polished leadership alone. We are about being on the ground with our people. Is it a beautiful thing? It's difficult. Being in governance is a difficult thing. But most importantly, our job is to put the poorest of the poor first. And that, of course, is unfortunately not the constituency of the DA. And so when they put forward ideas, there's always for a particular elitist grouping, and that's okay. I think that's a very particular constituency. But we cannot sit here and say that the ANC over the last 30 years has not made an incredible difference to this country. We have built more than 2 million houses in this country. We have greater access to electricity, to water, you name it, in terms of every single metric. Since 1994, we are better off than then. And let's talk about now, let's talk about today. We have had 4 consecutive quarters of GDP growth. We have improved investor confidence, a stronger rand, a better credit rating, declining inflation. In terms of fiscal situation, we've had a primary budget surplus, we've stabilized debt, we've brought about an end to load shedding, systems being transparent. In terms of logistics, no, I was quiet when you were speaking, Honorable Khakhau, so I think I'm deserving of the same respect. We've seen incredible progress at the ports and freight rail. We've had improvements in passenger rail. We've reopened almost all of those 40 railway lines with new locally made trains with the locally created jobs. We have 2.5 million opportunities in the last financial year through the Presidential Employment Stimulus, through our EPWP program, through our community work programs, through the SRD grant, which reduces food poverty. The very same DA wants to remove it because they don't want to actively assist people to transition class groups. So it's really important that we talk about these things. And I just want to mention one last thing on corruption.
I'm sorry, Fasiha, we're almost done. I need to move on to Makasule and give him some time to speak too. Makasule, so I would like to just move briefly onto illegal immigration enforcement before we get to the end. And the president took a much stronger line on immigration than in previous years in the State of the Nation. How can Parliament kind of prevent lawful enforcement to tipping over into xenophobic vigilantism?
So thanks very much. And it was good for the president to take that kind of a stance because for quite some time now, he has been pretending that it's not an issue, but it's a big issue in South Africa. Actually, the illegal immigration or the people entering and leaving South Africa, and we don't know who they are, it's also one of the reasons that led to us being grey-listed. It's both a threat to the economy, but also a threat to the safety of South Africans. So our position has always been, we want people to come to South Africa from anywhere. They must do so using the gate. We are not friends of people who jump the fence. We will never be friends. And there are laws in this country that must be respected. We want easy movement of goods and people legally into South Africa. And the state, like it's empowered to ensure that South Africa and its borders are being protected. So that's key. But it's also important for South Africans to not take the law into their own hands and then perpetrate acts of violence against foreign nationals. Because at times when this violence are being done, especially sometimes it could be me tomorrow who's targeted. You see, I'm tall, dark, and I speak Tsonga. Others might very well mistake me for an undocumented Mozambican. So we don't want South Africans to then take the law because I'll be attacked. And whilst I'm a South African, so this thing of South Africans looking at someone and then they say no, we decide whether this one is documented or not. It's not correct, and we must be able to speak out against. But we must be able to say, also working with our neighboring countries, that we should not, if we work together as the SADC region, then the level of illegal immigration can be controlled. But you have a situation where countries are allowing, I mean, like if you've got someone from Somalia that gets to South Africa illegally, how many countries has that person passed through and been allowed to pass through until they get to South Africa? Sometimes we must tell the truth that it is our neighbors that are opening their borders to people coming up from other countries, and then they end up in South Africa. But we cannot allow a situation where people enter South Africa illegally. Our borders must be protected, and South Africa's laws must be respected. We are not a friend of anyone who disrespects South African laws on account that they are from another African country. They can never be friends of Rise Mzansi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. So we're going to start wrapping up now. We've got 4 minutes left. We just have one last question, which I think can be for Fasiha. On the topic of the elections, with the discussions happening around electoral reform, where do you stand on some of the proposals that have been tabled to bring voters closer to elected officials through the vote? Karabo, maybe if there's time, if you can keep it to like 1 minute each, then you can jump in.
So I think they're actually really important and they're really good. And this is an issue that actually goes beyond the ANC, the DA, and Rise Mzansi. We're seeing people in our country check out of the democratic project. So many people, young people included, are saying, well, why should I vote? What do we get out of it? And I think if you look at some of these electoral reforms, the idea and the thinking or the intention behind them is to bring us closer to the vote and the ballot. And I say this because this is actually not even a partisan issue. This is a really big issue around the politics and the democracy of our country. So I think they are definitely favorable, but I think we need to be a little bit more innovative. I don't think necessarily that only electoral voting is going to take us there. I think we need to go back into our communities. We need to understand those issues, and we need to use some of the innovations we've seen overseas, but also things that work for us in really reimagining the electoral process. Because even our party representation system, what we call the PR councillor system, isn't always as representative as it should be. And I think very importantly, we need to consider a threshold for smaller parties, because we of course want everyone to be able to actually compete in the race in an election. But when it comes down to actual electoral reform, you need stability. And I think a threshold is quite important in that regard. So yes, I'm very supportive of them, but I think we can go even a step further to bringing us closer to our people.
Yeah,
Thresholds,
Fasiha is absolutely right,
thresholds.
Victoria. I mean, Makasule, for example, his political party are they kingpins within decisions that throw the Republic 100% of course of the project of representing the country properly. So look, we're 100% pro democratic participation of all South Africans, and everybody still has the freedom to choose who they want. But there must be a threshold to say not everybody can have a seat on the table if they're not going to bring meaningful impact on that table. So you can't have all of these pop-up and popcorn parties of 1% and 2% bringing our electoral confidence down. And that's why the threshold is there is important altogether. And we're still pushing forward as the Democratic Alliance to be able to get that across. As far as making politics sexy for more South Africans, perhaps we need to go back and copy and paste what the anti-apartheid movement did during apartheid, where you could walk to a 3-year-old child and ask them about the politics of the day and they could answer you. Right now,
this is what the ANC, that's on a lighter note.
Stop yourself. Cocomelone, right now, you ask them about anything politics, they know nothing. Worse, an 18-year-old who's supposed to be a first-time voter, they have no cooking clue what's going on in the Republic. So that's where we need to go back to the drawing board to make sure that we have civil education that is centered on public participation and an engagement with politics that is healthy, that is impactful, and that will give us the result that we need to safeguard our democracy.
Fantastic. I think we should end off there. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining
I
us.
needed to respond to this threshold thing.
Okay.
So in 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
So the best performing political party in South Africa right now, in South Africa's parliament, is Rise Mzansi.
That's
And
a
it's got
lie.
2 seats. No, that's true. By all measures, Rise Mzansi is the best performing political party. And if it was to the ANC and the DA, they will not want Rise Mzansi in parliament.
That
But
is
we
a
are the
lie,
best
Chief.
performing political party in parliament. Go and check a parliameter, go and check the PMG. The numbers don't lie.
People have
We are the best
100%
performing
No.
political party.
It's okay to feel overworked because there's not enough of you to go to committees, but that doesn't mean you're the best performing person in the parliament. There's no such.
The numbers don't lie. Go and check your numbers, Karabo.
No.
Go and check
Okay.
your own numbers. Go and check them against Rise
Everyone-
Mzansi. We are the
I'll
best
still
performing
beat
one.
you guys with my numbers. 100, 100, 100.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate your time, and thank you to our listeners. I hope you have a fabulous afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.